enhance your beer. This is the thing I always say, like, I'm much better presenting when I have a beer, but I'm even better when you have a beer, but there's no beer. So, just to introduce myself, first I want to thank Rob and Mark and whoever else was involved in putting on this group. It's probably one of the largest user groups I've seen. This only is rivaled by the one in the Netherlands. They actually get about the same amount of people, and it takes someone being a champion for it, and really wanting it to happen and bringing two very different types of people together, developers and marketers. And I just appreciate all that Rob's done, and hopefully you guys will continue it. As you can read, I'm the technical evangelist at Kentico. So long before I was at the stage where I'm at now, I was a developer, and I actually have about 18 years developing. And I worked for a partner for 7 years. I worked for BitWizards. So I've done a lot of implementations, but I like talking about Kentico, usually on a technical level of all things. Probably can't introduce that. And I like to educate, and I like to help people find answers, and maybe I just like to make people look at me while I talk. Just a little bit about me. I work out of my house in Florida, so I'm still adjusting to this ridiculousness that is this high altitude. I don't know. I haven't slept hardly at all, so if I just fall over, that's why. One other interesting fact, I am the only grandpa at Kentico. So there you go.
Really?
Still to this day, I'm not the oldest, but I am older than Peter Palace, but I am the only grandfather at Kentico. So there we go. That's a little bit of history about Bryan. But just real quick on the technical evangelism, my job is just basically to disperse information. I write content, I make webinars, I make podcasts, I host webinars, I give a lot of presentations. And my job is really just to get information out to the community. Sometimes that is our existing development community, sometimes it's not our development community. It's usually technical, although you might see a few things come out more and more that are a little bit less technical. And that's just me trying to broaden my reach into the world, because I want to be famous. So I don't want to be famous, I just want to get paid to be a speaker. So anyway, if you ever have any questions, you can always reach out to me. My contact information is going to be at the end of the presentation. If you ever have anything that I can help you find, I'll do my best. As I tell people all the time, if I don't know the answer, I'll just make up something that sounds good. Or I'll at least help you find the answer to the best of my ability. So now, after all that's being said, we're going to move on to the topic, optimization and performance. By far the #1 most requested topic that we get to speak on. By far the #1 topic that we speak the most on. And we've been saying the same thing for many times, and I don't know, they're just stubborn developers in the world, they just don't want to do it. This is a technical presentation. I will try to bridge the gap to any non-technical people. I did get a compliment from Peter Palace one time when I explained API changes in version 8 to a bunch of marketers, and he came up to me, he's like, I've never heard someone explain an API change to a bunch of marketers that makes sense. So I'm going to do my best. So while I will show some very specific technical things, I will try to bring it back to the marketing side of things, just so you have a context of what it's about and really how it would affect you and your day-to-day. So optimization and performance. Why is my site slow? That's what we get all the time. Why is my site slow? Your site's slow because a lot of things, but you really need to pinpoint what those things are, what the issue is. And you can do that with a number of ways. You can look at the Kentico event log, you can look at debug information, you can look at just the different variables of your environment. And you can turn in an expense report apparently. The Windows event log, Kentico Visual Studio debug information, memory dump information, whatever it is. If you want to find out why your site is not performing correctly, you have to get the information to understand what is causing your issues. And these are kind of a lot of different tools that you can do to get this information. And most of this entire presentation actually came from our consulting and support department. So this is what we see the most when people contact support and when they're trying to figure out why their site is slow. And the performance issues generally fall into a couple of categories. SQL, by far #1. Whether or not it's too many queries, or you're trying to get too much data, or working with too much data, that's one of the main things that causes an issue. The second one is how your pages are constructed. Are you putting too much content on your pages? Are you putting the content on there inefficiently? Are you trying to load too much information at once? All these compound, and a lot of times it's not one thing, it's all these things together that compound to make the site not perform correctly. Is your configuration architecture not correct? Are you not setting caching and how the system is using memory properly? So all these things affect that. And lastly is, did you have good code, or is the code written efficiently? But by far, you see the red is SQL. That is almost always the biggest issue of causing site performance is bad data management. So for the non-technical people, what I'm referring to is how your data is being stored and how it's being pulled out of the database to display within the site. And you can do that extremely inefficiently. So mainly, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to step in each one of these. And how long do I have, Rob? Just so I know.
I have dinner at 4 o'clock today.
4 o'clock? Well, I have a flight at 2:40, so I guess, all right.
You have till 2 o'clock.
I'll tell you this presentation, I kind of cover these categories, and then there's 4 or 5 examples. If time permits, I'll get to them. If not, I'll give all this to Rob, and all the information's in there too, so she'll be able to follow along. You just won't have my voice there to narrate.
20 to 30 minutes.
20 to 30? Okay. Too many queries, that's one of the biggest issues. You have too many controls on a page, you're trying to load too much data, and those are not efficient in how you're doing it. Huge menus where you're going to load 1,000 things in a menu or something like that. It's a lot of work on Kentico to pull this data and display it and use it. And you're pulling back too much information. You want to pull back 1 million records. Technically, you can do that, but how are you really handling 1 million records? How is someone going to interact with that? It's a lot of data for the server and the site to manage and use. So what we see is this is the biggest issue. So it's very easy to build up a page in Kentico. You can drag your little repeater on there and drop it and say, show me all the doctors in the adult obstetrician. I don't know. I'm trying to relate it back to where we are. But let's just say all the doctors. How about that? When you do that in Kentico, it's really easy to do it. And you just drop it on there and bam, there's all your stuff. But if you don't specify which columns you're pulling back, you potentially could be pulling back 100 times the amount of data that you need. And you specify the columns that you need. I think this works. It does. Specify the ones you need so you limit that down. But that is by far what we see the biggest issue is you're just trying to pull back too much data. The developer that implemented is not specifying this. And it's because it's so easy. So immediately get asked, well, why don't you limit the columns that you get by default? Because then you would yell at us because we're not returning the columns that you want. So all we can do is go, okay, here's all your data. You have to decide how to do it and what's the most efficient way to make it happen. But that is by far the most popular one. So how can you fix that? If you have too many queries, nested repeaters. So if you have, let's say you have a bunch of information for each doctor, and when you pull this back, for each doctor you also want to go get, these are all the assistants that work for that doctor or something. So you have this repeater inside of your repeater. And that's called a nested repeater. And that's a lot of work. That means every time you go get the doctor information, you then have to go do another call to go get all of the assistants for that doctor. And then for the next doctor, it's going to do it again, 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 again. And it really creates this huge performance impact on your site. So you can fight that with what's called a hierarchal viewer, which allows you to kind of pull all the data together collectively. And then as you do that, you define what levels they are so you can loop through them and define how each level works. And the last, another thing is macros and transformations. That's a big issue because for every time that you want to show a particular type of data, you may need to manipulate the data in somehow or some way just to show it or get more information. And you have to understand that for every time you're doing that, your more performance hits against your system. So you really have to think about that. And so you use caching. So if you're using some data, only pull it once and then use the same one again. And we see a lot of inefficient mega menus and big things like that. Again, you have to kind of use all the skills there. You have to use caching, think of how you're pulling back the data, specify the columns to make sure you're doing it as efficiently as you can. And if you're just pulling back too much information, again, it's all about setting the columns properly because you don't want to pull back everything. I did a simple example of this once, and I pulled back, it's like something normal, it was like just a page. I was like, pull all the pages back, and I don't even remember how much data was pulled, like how many records, but it was like 9.6 kilobytes, which is nothing. I mean, that's really small. But when I specified the columns, it went down to like 0.6 kilobytes. I mean, so that was just in a little basic example of the demo site. But if you had a doctor field with 100 attributes on it, and you're going to pull back everything, it potentially could be a lot of information. So next is about kind of understanding how you're building up your pages. So page content, too many requests on the page, too much stuff on the page, too many lists and columns and datas and images. It's a lot for Kentico to have to do every time someone goes into this page. There's so many different calls that has to happen. And then also what we see is missing pages, 404s. That's a huge deal. Not only is it bad for your SEO, because no one likes to go to a 404 page, unless you're talking about the 404 conference, which maybe when you go hit a page inside of Kentico, Kentico has to go, okay, what URL are you trying to request? Do I have any pages for that URL? No. Do I have any pages that have an alias of that URL? No? Okay, let me open up another database connection and write an error. So it's like 5 SQL calls for every 404. So we've seen a lot of things where people have a ton of 404s and they're adding all this performance overhead because the system's constantly having to handle every time that doesn't exist. So knocking down your 404s is obviously very critical. Also, if you're loading too much data on the page, too big of images, just a funny example from my past, I implemented a lot of things. I implemented a site for a modeling agency. Is anyone in the modeling industry? Okay. Well, I know both of you, so I'm not going to offend you with what I'm about to say. It's like talking to Martians. It was just like they would just not. I would try to tell them. They're like, well, we have all of our model images are, I don't know, 20 megabytes, and they want to load 5,000 on the page. And I'm like, yeah, you can't really do that. And so you have to think about those things, you know, on the images that you're using, how many of them you're loading. There's a lot of different things you can do to get around that. You can obviously resize your images. You can do some really cool JavaScript libraries to only load what the user looks like. So if you have a modeling site and they want to have 400 or 500 models, you're only going to load 20 at a time until you scroll down. Things like that. Also, very large script files. Everyone loves, I won't even say that because it's a lie. A lot of people love JavaScript. I'm not one of them. But a lot of people love JavaScript and they write these huge libraries, and while they're all very small, collectively it really comes up to a lot of data that you are sending from the browser down to the user for them to run on their machine. And if you have so much data and like so many files, it's a lot for lot to deliver to the user, and therefore you're impacting the performance and the experience that they're going to have. So what we see is too many requests on the page is usually the most common cause when it comes to page content. 404s are huge, a big deal, and then just inefficient use of images and script files. So how do you get around that? If you want to cut down your requests on the page, you can combine resources into single files. Like if you had several JavaScript libraries, you can combine them all into one. Because what many people don't know is it's not like if I have 100 JavaScript files on my page and someone hits that site, all 100 of those script files get downloaded to the users and get run on the user's machine. That's the way JavaScript works. Everybody loves it. I don't love it.
Woo, JavaScript!
You have problems. But what you may not realize is your browser only has the capacity to download like 6 at a time or something, or maybe 9. It depends on the browser and what version, stuff like that. So if you have 100 scripts that they're loading, it's got to load 6, 6, 6, 6, 6, 6, 6. So I mean, that's a big deal. You're causing a lot of lag in that user's experience to get this information. And if it doesn't load, then your site's not going to look very well. So you can start combining these, or what you can do is you can take your scripts and put them on different domains. A lot of people do that. They'll load some from over here, some from over here, some from over here. Even if it's the same server, if the browser thinks it's a different domain, it still treats them as individual requests. You can load one thing at one time. Get rid of 404s, fix broken links. Whether or not you use the built-in Kentico tools or something like Google Analytics, whatever it is, identify where you're getting your 404s from and eliminate them. Add a page alias, use a robots.txt file to not index that page, whatever it is, those 404s are critical. Not only, like I said, from a marketing perspective, they're horrible to get a 404 because that means someone's not finding the information they're looking at. So you probably aren't marketing that information very well if they're not finding it. But from a development side, those have a lot of impact on Kentico because it's designed to allow you to be very flexible with your URLs and how you can get the data, and you're causing Kentico to do a lot of work and when it doesn't need to. When it comes to too much data on the page, resizing images, I love this thing, like don't allow big images uploads. Not the easiest thing to do, but you can also do some creative things like resizing them as soon as someone uploads them and stuff like that, whether that's through some built-in functionality or custom functionality. So, and script files, minifying them, removing white space, combining them into single files so that they load easier. When it comes to configuration and architecture, what we see is just your site design's too complex. Kentico can handle a lot, but it can't handle a million pages underneath a node. It's too much data for Kentico to try to load for each section of the site. So if you have over 1,000 children under a single parent, that can really cause a performance issue inside your site, especially if you're going to load a menu or something. And if you have more than 500,000 pages in your document tree, that's a lot for Kentico to deal with, because when you go pull a page, it's not just like, oh, the page name and the URL. There's about 50 other things that come into play there, like what's it, node ID, document GUID ID, as Dave was talking about. And I don't know why I probably could come up with an answer of why the node GUID changes, but I would totally be speculating, so I'll have to find that out and get back to you. But basically it's just bad architecture, just inefficient layout of information. So, or too much information in the database. This is another awesome one. Because like, just delete your data. You have too much data, just delete it. Not as easily done in a lot of cases, but we often see very large analytics tables and unnecessary logging of certain tasks, whether those are staging tasks or synchronization tasks or something like that, and a lot of version history. So out of the box, Kentico has a lot of things set, like we're going to keep 10 versions of every file that you are working with or every page that you're working with, just as a nice benchmark. But if you crank that up to, oh, I don't know, I've seen people do like 1,000. That's 1,000 versions of every page in the site. And that's a huge table that could be gigs and gigs and gigs and gigs that Kentico has to deal with and work with. And not a good thing. But what we see generally is the version tables it tends to be the biggest, because people will crank, I want the last 50 versions of it, but they don't think about how that impacts the overall health and size of the database and site. So how do you get around that? If you're dealing with too much data in content tree, we have some guidelines for content business rules of how you should structure your data and how many you should put on each one in our best practices. So I recommend kind of reviewing them. If you have a lot of data in your content tree, like 500,000 plus things, you can store that data in a little bit different ways. There's other things of like storing it in custom tables or some other structure that doesn't have the overhead of pages in there, but you can still load content from it using many of the same controls and layouts and stuff as you would do with a page. So there's some workarounds that you can do with that too. If you're dealing with big analytics, most people, this is another one of those times, if you install Kentico EMS out of the box, it'll start tracking things. You're never going to delete it. Because if we delete it, you're going to yell at us. Because like, why did you delete our analytics? Why did you delete our contact data? Well, so we don't turn it on. But if you don't turn on deletion, it will just grow forever. So you really have to implement the right business rules and establish the policies that work best for your business and for your teams. But not turning on deletion or some sort of automatic maintenance of this is a critical error that a lot of people make, because it has profound effects on the performance of the site once it gets to a number. Like I've seen a site that, like a 200 megabyte website, the database, like the actual data was like 200 megabytes. And I've seen like object version histories tables and analytics tables be over 10 gig each on like a 200 megabyte site. That's just crazy. It's because they weren't doing any maintenance on that. So it can just grow and grow and grow. Again, checking out your version history, deciding how many you're actually going to keep, how many versions. Again, I don't have a magic answer there. You have to decide what works best for your business, but figuring out the answer is the key part. And so if you can deal with the last 5, if you have 10 pages in your site, sure, go ahead and keep 1,000 versions of it. You have, at most, you're going to have 25,000 pages. Might not, I don't know if I did it quickly. But if you have 10,000 pages in your site and you keep 10 versions of it, I mean, that's 100,000 versions that you potentially could have. So you have to kind of think, you have to understand the limitations and deal with, the tolerances that you can tolerate. A really good word. When it comes to code, I won't deal with this a ton, because we have a lot of markers in here and I won't bore you with it, but it's basically inefficient coding. Doing things in loops, not caching information, doing calls you don't need to make, things like that. We see all these do impact performance, and it really can change the experience someone has with your site and how well it behaves and operates. And those are kind of across the board, because when you get down to the code level, people do all kinds of stuff. So, but we generally see unnecessary queries or doing the same one in the loop over and over and over. That's just, you're causing extra work on your server. So if you want to try to limit those and kind of cut down on them, get the data once and then use that data to cache the data when you get it, so that way you're not pulling it on every time every doctor is loaded. Maybe you pull all the assistants, and then for each doctor you put them in memory, and so for every doctor you look through, you just look up in your memory table, which is not a call to the database, it's just in memory on the server already, and it's much more efficient, things like that. I'm just going to keep using the doctor thing over and over, because it's in my head now, I can't get it out. You can use shared data sets, so let's say you have a page where you have, I'm going to try to do something different. How about medical journals? How about that one? You have medical journals, and you want to show the different, the different categories and all the ones in pediatrics and whatever. And you want to show them, you can actually pull all the medical journals collectively and then use different repeaters just with the same data, as opposed to 4 different sections of it. Turn red, that can't be good. I think I want it. There we go. You can use the same one, so that way you're not making these unnecessary SQL calls. So again, it's more smart programming and smart implementation. But even this cannot even be programming. It's you dragging controls on the page as you're developing it. You just have to do it very intelligently and think through it and understand. Just because you drag it on the page, sure, you can build a page doing that and pull everything you want to on there, but it could have an effect on that. So you really need to understand what you're putting on your content pages, and you're using it as efficiently as possible. So how do you prevent things? Just follow our methodology. Done. It's over. We actually do have what's called the Deliver Now methodology. It's published, and it's basic guidelines for people to implement sites and how they can develop. And there's a lot of good practices in there, kind of walk you through and explain the different aspects of this is what you need to plan for, and this is how you need to think of data and how you're going to use it. And so it's really good. You could ask the support for consulting for the community, or tech evangelist if you want to. I'll be glad. You can cache a lot of things. So use caching quite a bit. That's going to save you a lot of performance. Kentico has a really powerful caching engine built into the core platform, and a lot of people don't take advantage of it, and you can do a lot of interesting things with that. You need to evaluate and test your implementation. So regardless of what any best tips you see, any best practices, any recommendation, it's your implementations that's really going to impact. So you need to understand your environment and how you are using the data so that you can prevent the issues, based on your information. You're only on your recommendations for other people, and it may be different for you. You want to obviously optimize anything that you're going to load. Your master page is loaded on everything, so make sure that is optimized as possible, because this is basically a layout that's every part of your site is using it. If that's inefficient, every single page is inefficient. So optimizing that is very critical. The Rosslyn Compiler, I can't make this marketing, I'm sorry, it's just development. You can take the Rosslyn compilers and use them in versions 9, 8.2, 8.1, I think, and 8, I don't know. I think we have it in the documentation with you can do it, but I can tell you version 10 will have the Rosslyn compilers built into it, and you get approximately 50% faster first page load. It's pretty cool. So, and just use common sense. You have to think about it. Don't, make sure whoever's implementing your functionality, whether it's a designer or a marketer or a developer, that they understand what they're doing, because everything you drag onto that page has an implication. So using common sense and understanding that is critical. So these are the examples that they had of just some different scenarios. So in this scenario, we have slow product listing pages. And how this was found was they looked at the Kentico debug and the event log, and they realized that there were 500 SQL queries on the product listings page. Some of them were pulling back 17 megabytes more of data. 500 calls, each pulling back 17 megabytes of data. That's a lot of stuff. And there were 15,000 404s, most of them caused by no robots.txt. Significant amount of performance overhead is happening on here. If you're not, basically you got search engines constantly crawling every bit of your site, and you're not limiting any specific areas. Actually, no, I take that back. Search engines are not crawling because there's no robot.txt. So anytime someone, so they have no idea what's in your site, you have really bad SEO in that capacity. And then also, it's just a tremendous amount of data there that you're loading in on every call. And there's potentially 500 something calls with a product listing page. So what's the solution? Add missing files, fix the broken links. Cut down. On this example, the reason those SQL calls are so big is they're pulling back everything about each product. They're saying, they're not specifying columns, so for every product it brings back, it's everything associated with that product, which is the product, which has all the SKU information, which has the underlying page information, which has the underlying tree node information, plus all of the version information too. That's how you get 17 megabytes per call. So specifying the columns is critical. And also using caching and implementing that within the recursive areas of the layout ended up being very critical to improve the performance there. If anybody has any questions along the way, feel free to ask. I didn't work on these projects, but I can make up an answer at the time. So, example 2, slow website, slow page load time. This is what they use to look at that. So, SQL Debug, SQL Management Studio, basically SQL profiling, and the K-Inspector. So, if you're a developer and you do not know what the K-Inspector is, then I have failed you. Because the K-Inspector is an open source tool that you can use that will basically crawl through your Kentico installation and tell you, you're not specifying columns here, you have a big table here. This is potentially a performance issue in this transformation. It's free, it's on GitHub. If anyone would like to know where it is and you don't know, find me and I'll make sure you get that because you should be using it on every one of your sites. Even if you've used Kentico since version 3.0, you would probably find some mistakes you make in your websites using the K-Inspector, so don't feel bad. But what that actually came up with is, in this particular case, 3.8 gigabytes for 6.9 million activities in that table right there. So that's a 6.9 followed by a whole bunch of numbers that actually will equal up to 69 gigabytes of data. Or 6.9 million activities with, where does it say 3.8? That's what it is, 3.8 gig of data with 1 gig of contacts. So I don't know what version of Kentico this is. I don't know what it was. My guess is probably 8.2, 8.1. But that's a lot of context for it to try to manage. So the solution was cleaning up analytics and setting up automatic deletion of anonymous contacts. That's a tough one. It really depends on the business whether or not you want to get rid of anonymous contacts. To some people, they actually want to know what people do anonymously on the website to some degree. But others, they might not be any use for them. So this is where you want to look at how you're managing your contacts and your activities and set it up appropriately. But I can tell you in version 10, we are shooting for 100 million contact capability and 400 million activity capability. So this is a little bit older version, but we are putting significant effort into improving the EMS capabilities in version 10.
I would just say with anonymous contacts, one thing to think about if you're using EMS, that you want to talk to your sales teams about when you want to cut that data off. That's one of the things we found you can see with an EMS site really balloon very quickly is leaving those things open and saving that data forever. And you really don't want to do that. And it's not really relevant to the business. If you have a person that drops into your sales funnel and your typical funnel might be like, say you're a B2C company, your funnel's going to probably be within probably a few weeks' time at the most. But if you're a B2B, you might have something as long as like a 4-month window or such. But if they are not doing anything with your site in that period of time, you probably want to take them off anyways. If they re-enter and buy later on, it's probably because they had a different trigger. They had another entry point at a later date. But if you saved all that information just on the hopes that one person in 1,000 actually comes back to the site later on, you're going to end up really, really bloating your database for absolutely no reason. And so, but I think, so you can't really define a best practice for all sites you build because it really depends on the way the business that you're helping, exactly what your model is.
That's a great point. It really will be situational on your business, but in some cases, having all these old anonymous contacts may actually skew the data that you really want to know. It actually might be skewing how you interpret how your site is performing or how a particular campaign is doing. So understanding the settings and setting it appropriate to your situation is the key part. Number 3, a very slow website with slow page time, and I think it has that. So in this case, we're not supposed to see the solution yet. Debug, K-Inspector, you're seeing a lot of the same tools. that we use over and over, that our support team, our consulting teams use over and over to try to find the issues. And basically what we have is 87,000 unprocessed search tasks and 74,000 staging tasks sitting in the database. So basically what happens is every time a request is made to the website, Kentico by default will process these things on each request. It just keeps trying to do them over and over and over. And there's something that's wrong. This is how you have a ton of these rows, lots of stuff in these tables that are just huge, taking up 92,000 analytic things. Something's wrong. It's not processing these tasks, and they just continue to pile up, which is increased size of your database, and you're causing Kentico to keep trying the same failed task over and over and over. So what you have to do, you could remove the task, that's a pretty easy way to do it, but really you need to fix the issue, find out what's causing this issue, and possibly disable logging of specific tasks if you don't need them. So the task is an interesting thing because, again, it's one of those things like you don't know about it until you really have some critical issue because you just think that they're happening, and then all of a sudden you're like, I'm not really seeing the search results I expect. And then you go in there and you find 87,000. I mean, that's huge. And so you really have to kind of stay on top of these. You should do some regular maintenance and look at these kind of tables on occasion just to isolate and to identify if you have a growing issue or not. So,
Question.
yes?
Does using the external scheduler instead of relying on hits to kick off scheduled tasks give you any performance benefits?
I've never implemented the external scheduler very often, but basically what you're doing is you're just running it, you're running that task in another application, another thread. So in theory, you are removing that processing from your current application thread, but you're still on the same server. But you can't isolate it in that way. I think in some instances, yes, you may, especially if something in that task potentially is a blocking thread, or it's doing something that causes a lock on a table or something. And in that case, yes, I think it would impact performance, but I don't know if it would every time. I'm not sure. I know you can also, I think, run a task on a completely different server. I've never done that. Has anyone ever done that? No. I think you can do that, which in that case you certainly would, because you're putting it on a completely different server. I've never implemented that, though. I have done it in an external task, meaning check the box. So I knew it was an external task. But you're still on the same server, and again, unless it had some code that was blocking in there, a lot of scheduled tasks are happening in the same thread behind the scenes anyway. So, I'm not sure. That would kind of be a trial and error to see what the performance outcome was. Example 4, slow page times. You can tell all the examples are pretty much the same. Oh, how do we find this? Well, the Kentico debug inspector, browser dev tools, and eliminating variables, output cache. So in this case, the macros that were being used in the transformations were resulting in 700 something queries. 1,400 queries, 9.8 megabytes retrieved from the SQL server for each query, or at least that much. From those queries, we retrieve back 9.8 megabytes. 9.8 megabytes you're sending down. And if you're still on AOL dial-up, that's going to take a while to download. So, do you know that there's still like 3 million people on AOL? I heard that on like NPR. Like 3 million people are still using AOL. Anyway, unnecessary queries and just a very large page that the user's trying to load, 3.6 megabytes. If you're like where I live and where we have Cox, that would be an impact. Sometimes they suck. So you can see these are just some queries. This is actually from the debug settings of Kentico, where it's showing you this is what the impact of this SQL server is and how much data it's pulling back. And how you fix that, setting the columns property, brought down significantly. So this is an example. So these were 9.8, it went down to 0.8 just by setting the columns because of just the overhead of pulling back everything. And using caching on the macros and retrieving the data once as opposed to pulling the macros again and again and again. This gets into the smart programming, understanding what you're doing and defining and configuring it properly. And the last example, slow page load time, shockingly enough. Kentico debug and inefficient transformation code. So in this code, it's basically going into the tree node. It's getting all the ones on the root of the menu item where it says don't hide the navigation, and it's building a list. And then this is basically doing the same thing again to build the list again and over and over and over. And it's a really inefficient way to do it. Be much more efficient. So for every page it finds, as it loads up this menu, it's going into the content tree. It's showing to pull back the information and then write in a list item. for every single one of those, which is really, if you had 1,000 things or 100 things, that's 100, actually that's 200 calls, because that's its own call, that's its own call, that's its own call, and that's its own call. So I mean, it's a lot to do. So what's a much more elegant solution is you do this once, write it to cache, and then you just use that cache value over and over and over. So you are not making the calls. It's the database calls what kills performance. It's just, there's just too many. So what can you do after you update your code? So those are just some examples. I'm almost done. What can you do after that? You can look into upgrading your network, because everybody has an endless budget to do that. You can host your images and stuff in something like CDN, or your files in CDN, so you get the leverage of loading it from around the world. You can use web farms. You can, obviously that will improve your performance. You can host it in the cloud, which you'll hear me talk about a lot, because I love working with Azure, and which is Microsoft's cloud, and that will basically give you endless resources. And you can scale that up to servers and however many you want to host it on. So I mean, you have a Kentico license to support it. Both Mark and Ben can help you out with that license. And if you still have trouble after this with your performance, you can always get a code dump, basically a dump of the memory of the server, get that to Kentico Consulting. They can help you kind of crawl through that and isolate where the issue might be. How can you prevent these issues? That's probably the next biggest thing to talk about. You need to be monitoring your stuff. You need to understand the health of your services and your implementation so that you understand what's happening and what's impacting it. You need to be looking at your event log. Now, I will caution you about saying, let's email every exception, because then you're going to get every exception in the world. But someone needs to be aware of what's happening in your event log, whether that's a daily thing they go look at, or maybe they get notified of an exception. But understanding what those are, because even if it's 404s, I pretty much beat that horse to death, those are bad, and they cause a lot of work for Kentico, so you need to understand what's happening. You can do that with your event log reports. You can define your own custom reports inside Kentico and then subscribe to those. So if you maybe didn't want to get the event log, you could just subscribe to a report that will run every day and then send your report if here's all the errors in the event log. It's really easy to do things like that. You can use a third-party service to monitor your site, kind of tell you what's happening. Is it up, is it down? What's the performance like? What is your response time? And regular maintenance is probably the key thing. When it comes to Kentico and caching and setting it up, you're going to get an idea of what you want to do when you build your site and you implement it. You're like, oh sweet, I know exactly what I want to do. It doesn't stay that way. That's just what it is at that moment. But as your data grows or shrinks, those variables are always going to change. So it really takes regular maintenance and constant vigilance to understand what's happening with your application and your environment, and always adjusting them so that they make the best experience possible for your users. And often it's not always the same. You started out with 10 people in your company on the bio page. Well, yeah, you can load easily, and then you go to 10,000 people. That's a different environment you got to deal with. There's a lot of different variables there, so you have to adjust things. So it takes someone watching those things to understand what the big difference is. We have a lot of links here, and so I put them here, but I'll give Rob this whole deck too. I like to do that because people are always like, because what good is this if you don't see the link? That doesn't do you any good, so I was putting it beside it. But anyway, we have a lot of stuff in our documentation. We have downloads that Kentico deliver now, performance optimization, caching tips, basically everything I talked about. You can find a lot of stuff inside of here, especially that guy right there. And this is a really good one too, performance optimization tip. So there's a lot of resources available to you, because the number one thing we get asked about is performance optimization. The number one thing we talk about is performance optimization. So I can't tell you how many times I have told developers, specify your columns. Specify your columns. That's your problem. But it's easy. But I did it for the first 4 years of Kentico. I just drag a repeater on the page. So don't feel too bad. I did it. If you have anything...
You need a little wristband to give to all developers.
Yeah. It's like, everybody plugs their head up. If you want to contact me in any way, this is all my information. I am a resource to the community, and I will always do whatever I can. I like coming to Denver, although I'm determined in talking to Rob, I don't sleep when I come here. But my sister lives in Idaho Springs, so I do make it out here on occasion, and if there's future events, I'm sure we'd be glad to attend those as well. But feel free to reach out to me. I used to have my phone number on there, but I have to be careful because I meet people around the world and they could call me at 2 in the morning. But this is my Skype and my Twitter, so you feel free to reach out to me. I like talking to people that work from home, so I don't see many people. But that's basically all of it. Any questions on the performance optimization? Do they have any challenges that they have? Yes, sir. I still don't know why no grids don't change.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.